pales in comparison to all the stuff that is up to 180 feet below the ground. So our front doors is the very front of the model there, and that digital display at that far, I guess my right-hand side, your left-hand side, represents the machinery and equipment for alternator number 1, just in front of the elevator. And then this here represents the system for alternator number 11. That's the one all the way at the far end of the facility. So you can see they each have their own 10-foot diameter supply pipe of water. So you can see that there. They all have their own drive shaft and then turbine at the bottom there. I don't know what's going on with my technology. So just below that we have our thrust deck. Anyone here ever roller skated or skateboarded before? Show of hands. Yeah, inside those wheels you've got those lovely bearings. And what happens to those bearings if you get a lot of dust or debris or they kind of heat up a little bit too much? What might happen? It did, exactly. So it was imperative that our 3-foot diameter or 1 meter diameter thrust bearings have free of dust.
Both the doors. All right, come on in, folks. How many do you have? Stroller right in the middle to the back, and you go to the left of it. And no, I'm gonna hold you up.
Anything out there, eh? 180 feet, yeah, exactly. So a company by the name of Canadian Niagara Power dug down 180 feet from the front doors where you entered today, all the way to the very back of the facility to make space for all of the equipment needed to create hydroelectricity. Hydro meaning water. So this big pipe here on my left-hand side, if everybody can see it, it has a diameter of 10 feet or 3 meters. So we can essentially take this elevator we're in and put it inside that pipe and still have a little bit of room left over. Water would come into that pipe from the upper Niagara River. That water would drop about 140 feet because its job is to spin a turbine, which is connected to a drive shaft connected to our alternators upstairs. If you look out the back there, we can see the drive shaft for alternator number 2. If you look behind it there, we've got the penstock pipe that supplies it water. And inside that solid casing, there are 2 turbines that would spin with the assistance of that water. And then all that water, once it was done being used, would dump out behind us into our spillway or wheel pit. And even though it does look dark back there, that extends the entire length of the building to catch all of that water. And how do we get rid of all that water? Well, we have to construct a big drainage pipe. So when these doors open up, you'll see the size that they had to create here. And you've got a bit of a trek ahead of you. It's 2,200 feet long or 670 meters. Once you get to the end, there's a pretty awesome view of the river and the falls. When you're done, come all the way back and we'll take you back upstairs.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
down there? Pretty good? Doesn't look like anyone got too wet down there. Usually I can tell from the hair and the coats, unless you look like me, then it's a little harder to tell. Any questions on anything you've seen so far as you've gone around the power station?
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, you did a wonderful job on it. I mean, when I think about it and the tools they had back at the turn of the century to build a place like this with this technology in 4 years, it's pretty amazing to me. Now it would take 4 years of paperwork to get it even started.
For how many years is this place run?
Yeah, it ran from 1905 until 2006. They stopped making power at the end of 06, and they stayed open for another 3 years and closed at the end of 2008.
Generator floor.
Thank you.
So what they did for that is they imported these shingles right here. These are terracotta shingles. Terracotta is normally that orangish brown color. They paid a little bit extra to get it painted green so that it would match the trees in the hills behind us. And then they would also use dolostone for the foundation. Now this dolostone is now a reddish grayish tinge. When it's freshly harvested, it has like a blue-green color to it. That blue-green matches the blue-green of the water, matches the blue tinge of the sky. Kind of helps the whole base of the building blend in a little bit. Now when it came to the inside of the building, because no one was really going to be seeing it, they told them, do whatever you want, you have free reign. So if you take a look around here, you're going to notice there's a lot of fancy materials. There's a lot of marble, a lot of glazed brick, there's a ton of brass everywhere, wrought iron and mahogany railings. Now those are all very, very fancy materials, especially for 1905. And the reason they did that is because not a lot of people had electricity back then. And they were trying to sell this very, very foreign concept as something worth investing in, something that's luxurious, something that you want in your house. So they used all these fancy materials, and back then you had to pay your bills in person. So you come up to the front gate, you go through those big brass doors that you saw at the front, you pay your bills, and they let you up on that balcony just right up top there, just so you can see over the entire power station, not only see how pretty it was and how fancy it was, but also see exactly where all of your money was going to. Now, every single one of our tour guides here has a little bit of a different tour, something that makes it unique to them. Mine involves a little bit of a ghost story, so before we move on here, I'm going to tell you our little ghost story. Don't worry, there is a happy ending to it, so you got nothing to worry about. Starting on the second board right over there, there's the name William Birch Rankin. William Birch Rankin, he was the founder of this power station right here, and he also oversaw the construction of the Adams plant, which is the sister plant on the American side. Unfortunately, the Adams plant is no longer there. They tore it down after it shut down, so this is the only one that's still standing out of the two. But that one was basically the working prototype for this power station right here. Now, William Birch Rankin, he was a little bit of a workaholic. Apparently, he worked about 20 hours a day. Even Nikola Tesla himself said that that man would work while everybody else slept. And if those are words coming out of Nikola Tesla's mouth, that's pretty high praise. He worked super hard all the way up until 1905 when this power station was finally finished construction, and he decided to celebrate by going on his honeymoon with his wife, Annette Kittredge Rankin. On his honeymoon, he unfortunately passed away due to a heart attack, likely due to working himself so hard. That didn't really sit very well with Annette Rankin. She spent the next 15 to 20 years trying to find a way to communicate with him, trying to find a way to talk to him through seances, mediums, stuff like that. And it ended up driving her a little bit crazy, a little bit depressed. And April 1st of 1921, she went missing. May 1st of 1921, she was found deceased on a dock in New York. Shortly after that, workers around this power station were noticing that there was a lady in a fur coat walking around the lower decks. No one ever got close enough to talk to her because she would vanish by the time that they got there, but most people assume it was Annette Rankin here for one of two reasons. Either one, she was spiteful that her husband's work took him away from her, or number two, she figured due to him being a workaholic, even if the afterlife, this is probably where he came back to, probably had some unfinished business. So if she was looking for him anywhere, this is probably the place she's gonna find him. Now we haven't really seen her in a long time, so you don't have anything to worry about when you're walking around down in the tunnel there. She won't bother you one bit. We assume that she's probably found her husband. They're off living a very happy afterlife somewhere else, far from here, so you got nothing to worry about, no ghosts will haunt you around here. So we're gonna hop over to the other side of these cabinets, talk about some of the jobs that people would have had in this building. Well, if you don't like heights, this is definitely not the place you want to be working, because if you came here and you didn't have any experience in a trade at the time, they give you a janitorial job. Now janitors, they had to go around, they had to clean all these big fancy windows right behind me here, clean all the little windows up top as well, and clean all the lower decks right beside me here. The only problem with that is right beside me here is a 180-foot deep drop. So even if you're working around the top level of that, they're still about 170 feet below you. If you're not really good with heights, not really a place you want to be. Also down there, it was very dark, it was very damp, it was very cold, so it wasn't necessarily the greatest work conditions. Why did they put people down there and why did they give people those jobs? Well, they wanted to test if they were good with heights because you'd be working around them a lot. And they also wanted to test your resolve. If you were able to handle the dark, damp, cold conditions that were down there for about 2 to 3 years, they would allow you to mentor or apprentice under a mentor for one of the big boy machines up here, hopefully level up your game, hopefully never have to go down there ever again. Unless you wanted to, then they would gladly send you down there. We also had a blacksmith on site back then. No UPS, no Amazon in 1905. Something broke down, took a couple days, couple weeks, couple months, maybe even a year for that piece to come in. So they kind of got sick and tired of waiting. They just got a blacksmith on site, make any repairs you had to do on site, no wait times needed. They also had a machine worker eventually. That is basically the same concept as the blacksmith. It kind of just evolved into the machine worker. Now lastly, we had a lot of women who used to work in this power station. They did the telephone switchboards, so they would be working up top in there on all the telephone switchboards. And they also did probably one of the most difficult jobs in this power station, payroll. Because there were hundreds of customers, no computers, no calculators, all mental math. You had to remember how much every person owned. There was probably about a dozen of them. So it was a very, very difficult job, and I'd just like to give a shout out to the women who used to work here, because that is definitely not something I would have been able to do because I am terrible at math. Now lastly, there was also the Fort Erie Test Kitchen. Fort Erie Test Kitchen, it was actually really neat. What they would do is they send a letter to every home, and they would say, come out to Fort Erie, try out our new electric stove. So all the women in the house, they would go to Fort Erie, try out the electric stove. They basically give you a recipe card for making a cake or a pie. And if it was the greatest thing you'd ever tasted in your life, which it probably was because it was made with electricity, they come in, they'd install that stove in your house completely free of charge. You wouldn't have to pay one bit, except for the increments that were under your electrical bill as well. Now back then it was only about $80 for a stove. Nowadays it's obviously a lot more. It's kind of the system that they used to get everybody trapped in electricity, and clearly it worked out because we're still using electricity to this day. So we're gonna hop over to the middle of the floor right over there. On our way there, I want you to take a look over to this side. There's a white machine, kind of looks like a peanut. We're gonna talk about that a little bit later. So everybody got the chance to see the white machine just right over there. Like I said, it kind of looks like a peanut. That is called an exciter. We used to have 5 of those, and they were sat right where those markings in the ground are. 4 of them were used at all times, and 1 was just used as a backup in case one of the other 4 went down. Now if you're wondering what the exciter does, like I said, it kind of looks like a peanut. Well, if that's our peanut, these are our elephants. What happens when you feed a peanut to an elephant? It's happy, gets excited, it's ready to work. Exact same concept with these. There's a motor inside every single one of those that when it starts spinning, it generates a direct current. That direct current is then fed into the alternators to make an electromagnetic field, so that when they start spinning, they're generating electricity. While we're on the topic of these alternators here, does anyone notice a difference between the one on my left and the one on my right? The holes are different. The reason being is because in 1905 they built up the first 5, they put in a temporary wall, and they kept building on the other side there, so it was both a live construction site and a live power station at the same time, which nowadays doesn't really fly, but workplace health and safety was a little bit different back then. So with these first 5, they were noticing something was going a little wrong. A lot of workers were passing out, a lot of workers were getting real tired, and that's because it was really, really hot in here. Those alternators right there ran at about 130 degrees Celsius. For reference, 100 degrees Celsius is boiling water, so that's hot enough to cook your pasta in. So their solution to this was, we'll just cut some bigger holes. Bigger holes means better ventilation, means better airflow. It also means it runs a little bit more efficiently. Well, those ones ran at 130 degrees Celsius. These ones over here ran at 90 degrees Celsius. These ones made 10,000 horsepower, or ran at 10,000 horsepower. These ran at 12,500 horsepower. So you got a little bit of an extra kick out of these ones right here. Now, just because they ran a little bit cooler doesn't mean it wasn't very, very hot in this power station nonetheless. We actually had a worker who now works for us. He used to work in this power station. His name is Jim. Apparently, he told me that he would go through about 3 or 4 pairs of coveralls every single day because he was just constantly sweating throughout the entire day. So you can just imagine how hot that would have been in this power station. I'm sure if you come back in the summer, it'll probably be roughly around there. So throughout this story, I'm going to be talking about alternating current and direct current quite a bit. Direct current, DC, that's the stuff that's battery power, or anything that's battery powered that runs on direct current. So your watch, your phone, stuff like that, that's all direct current. Alternating current, that's the stuff that comes out of your wall sockets. So your stove, your fridge, that's all alternating current right there. Starting off with Mr. Thomas Edison over here. This man probably has one of the biggest misconceptions when it comes to electrical history. That is that he did not, in fact, invent the first light bulb. He did, however, produce the filament inside of it that lasted way longer than anybody else's. And that kind of helped him get a little bit of a monopoly on electricity early on in its history. So he was going around New York, showing off his direct current invention, lighting up various streets of New York, one of which was Pearl Street. Now, George Westinghouse also happened to be at Pearl Street that night, and he was also an inventor. He created the air brake in the locomotive train, same air brake that we use today. It's just a little bit more modified, a little bit more modernized than what we have now. Now, he saw this and he got inspired. He wanted to get into the electrical game because of Thomas Edison, but he believed in a different way of doing it. Instead of using direct current, he believed that alternating current was a more effective way of generating electricity. So he had the idea and he had the money, he just didn't have the machine or the patent yet, and that's when he ran into Mr. Nikola Tesla. Now, Nikola Tesla worked for Thomas Edison for about 6 months. They had a little bit of a falling out. The reason being is because Thomas Edison came to his senior employees with an invention and he said, anybody that can improve on my invention, I'll give you $50,000. Now, back then, $50,000, about $1.5 million today. So Thomas Edison was offering a lot of money. Well, Nikola Tesla is a very, very smart man, and he was able to improve on that invention. And when he came to Thomas Edison to claim his prize, Edison told him, I'm not paying you $50,000. That was a joke. You do not understand American humor. Now, naturally, that didn't sit very well with Nikola Tesla. He decided to leave the company and start giving lectures at various universities throughout the States. One of those lectures, George Westinghouse also happened to be at. Now, George Westinghouse approached Nikola Tesla after this lecture, and he basically said, let's team up, we'll make a power duo, we'll start pushing alternating current as a viable source of electricity. And hopefully people would start buying into it. They would start transitioning to alternating current instead of direct current. Well, people did start to buy into it a little bit, and Thomas Edison caught wind of this. Like I said before, though, this man had a monopoly on electricity early on in his history, so now money that was supposed to be going to him was now going to Westinghouse and Tesla. He wasn't very, very happy about that. So what he did is he started a smear campaign against alternating current, started telling people it's extremely dangerous, extremely volatile, not something you want in your house, even going as far as paying somebody to electrocute animals live on stage just to prove how dangerous it was. Back then, he also helped create the electric chair that was used in penitentiary systems. The electric chair used alternating current for its punishment. So what he did is he tried to get it branded as Westinghousing somebody so that everyone would associate it with George Westinghouse and not with Thomas Edison, the guy who helped invent it. This whole story culminates now in 1893 at the Chicago World's Fair. This is kind of like the final battle of our movie right here. Chicago had this idea. They wanted to turn night into day by illuminating thousands of light bulbs throughout the fair. They just didn't know if they wanted to use alternating current or direct current yet. So they put out a bid, and the Edison group, having a lot of money, they put in a very, very large bid, not something that anybody else would have been able to match. The Westinghouse group, they figured they had a little bit of money and they'll toss their name in the hat and hope for the best. Well, they did end up actually winning despite putting in the lower bid. I like to say it's because Edison didn't have a fancy mustache like the other two. But the real reason is just because direct current costs about 3 times as much money, costs about 3 times as many materials. So they probably went with the cheaper, easier solution in alternating current. So that's normally where that story would approached Westinghouse after, and he said, "That's fine, I can see, but you can't use my light bulb." Well, the problem was Edison had the only mass manufactured light bulb in the world at the time. So what are you going to illuminate if you don't have access to thousands of light bulbs? Well, Westinghouse and Tesla, they put their heads together. They managed to conceptualize, design, and mass manufacture thousands of light bulbs right before the Chicago World's Fair. And they screwed in the last light bulb right as the board was illuminating, just to prove that it was in fact the same function for electricity. Now there was one last guy that was at the Chicago World's Fair who was not on this board. Is anybody here familiar with the name Lord Kelvin or the Kelvin measurement system? It's the same guy. Well, Lord Kelvin, he was working on 2 power stations in North America at the time, the Niagara Parks Power Station and the Adams plant. And he had everything in it except for the machines yet. He was going to go with direct current until he saw what Westinghouse and Tesla were doing, and he decided to employ the 2 of them to design the very same machines you see in this building here today. So those 3 play a huge part as to why we use alternating current here in North America and not direct current like they do over in Europe. There is still a little bit of a divide because of that between alternating and direct current. It's just not as hostile as it used to be because these 3 are no longer involved in it. Now we're going to hop over to 3 pieces of very important equipment right down that way. So right here we have 3 pieces of very important equipment. We have the flyball governor, the Westinghouse air brake, and floor grills. Unfortunately, floor grills don't have a cool name in front of them like flyball governor and Westinghouse air brake, but they are very important, so we will talk about them a little bit after. Starting with the flyball governor over here. These ones are imported from Switzerland. Does anyone know what the Swiss are known for apart from chocolate? Watches, timepieces, clocks, stuff like that. That's basically what this is. It's kind of like a speedometer. It tells you exactly how fast this alternator is spinning right here. Because they had to monitor it, they had to make sure it was spinning exactly 250 rotations a minute, no more, no less. You'd be able to monitor that by using the gauge at the top there, and by also using these fly balls just right over here. These were also kind of a auto-regulation system. Basically, if it was spinning faster than 250 rotations a minute, they would come out to slow it down. If it was going too slow, they would come in to speed it up, kind of like how a figure skater contracts and expands in order to speed up or slow down. They would also be able to affect the ring valve down below over the turbine by spinning this wheel right here. Say you had to shut it off for some reason, you come over here, you shut it all the way closed. You wait till it goes down to about 100 rotations a minute. Then you come over to the Westinghouse air brake over here, you flip it on, you wait 4 seconds, you flip it off, you wait 4 seconds, you flip it on, you wait 4 seconds. You just keep doing that until it shuts off. Now why did they wait till it went down to 100 rotations a minute? And why did they pulse it? Well, the reason is because the brake pads back then were made out of wood. And if anybody remembers their science class, when wood meets friction, you get fire. That is why there is a very large fire extinguisher just right over there. They had a lot of brake fires back then. Now coming back over to the flyball governor over here, when this told you that this was spinning 250 rotations a minute, you knew you were good to go, you could start sending out electricity. The only problem with that is everything in this power station had to be ready to send out electricity at the same time, and it had to be synchronized to the grid that it was sending electricity to. So without being able to shout to your buddy just down that way, how would you figure out if you were good to go and if everyone was ready to go at the same time? Well, they would use the synchroscope right up top there. It kind of looks like a clock, has 2 needles on it. One needle will stay still, the other needle will go all the way up. Power stations aren't really built to handle that. Well, they were working here the one day, and you might have noticed when you were walking to this building, there are no power lines coming out of the roof. That's because all the power lines had to be run underground in order to meet the requirement of not looking too ugly. All those power lines ran all the way up to a transformer over by where Marineland was. And the one day they were building a casino up top there. Someone dug a little bit too deep in the wrong spot and they ended up hitting one of the power lines. That sent electricity shooting back into the power station here and lit up one of the alternators in a giant fireball that lasted several hours. Now Jim happened to be working here that day. He's the one who told me this story. And apparently he was training an apprentice that day. That apprentice saw the fireball, ran out of the building, and was never seen again. So clearly that job was not for him. Now coming over these floor drills right over here. They look really simple, they are pretty simple, but they are also probably the most important piece of equipment apart from the alternators themselves. Say you had a fire down in the brake deck, and you had to get that giant fire extinguisher down there. Well, back then, even still today, no elevators down there, no stairs down there, just ladders to get up and down. So no matter how strong you are, you're probably not lugging that big fire extinguisher all the way down with you. So what they would do, they'd roll back these floor grills, they would use the crane just hanging from the ceiling up top there, and they would lower down the fire extinguisher to whatever level they had to go to. They could also do that with wrenches, toolboxes, any other large piece of equipment as well. Its other use was to get light down there. 1905, no flashlights, probably not the greatest idea to bring an oil lamp into a functioning electrical facility. So what they would do is they use these big fancy windows right behind me here, hopefully be a sunnier day than today, and they would get that sun shining all the way down into the lower decks so that the workers could see exactly what they were doing. The other purpose was to get the smell out of there. Apparently it smelled like 7-day-old laundry down there at all times, so kind of help get some fresh air down there, kind of help everyone breathe a little bit better. And the last purpose was to get the sound pollution out of there, because down there it's extremely loud. Up here it's pretty loud because of the hum of the alternators, but down there's where the penstocks are. Penstocks, 80,000 gallons of water a minute rushing on either side of you. It's like 2 roller coasters just going at all times. They didn't really have hearing protection up until the 70s, so a lot of workers ended up either having severe hearing loss or just going completely deaf. Now we're going to go further down that way, all the way to the model of the penstock. We're going to talk about the water that should be coming off of the ball. Penstocks, 10 feet diameter. Hopefully you can imagine 80,000 gallons of water a minute rushing through one of them. Unfortunately, this one's only made out of plywood. To be honest with you, I thought it was made out of iron or steel for about the first 4 months of working here. So it shows how good of a job that they did replicating it. Like I said, 80,000 gallons of water a minute rushing through one of those. You multiply that by 11, that's a lot of water that should be going off of the falls that isn't going off of the falls. Let you on a little bit of a secret here. We use about 50% of the water that should be going off of the falls to generate power today. So what you see down at the platform and what you see at the top here is only about half of what the falls actually are. The reason that we do that is 1, to generate electricity, and 2, to help with the erosion. Before we started taking water before it went off the falls, it went back about 3 to 5 feet every single year. Nowadays, it only goes back about 1 foot every 5 to 10 years, so it kind of helps with the erosion a little bit. Helps us from stopping to have to extend that platform out every single year. Now at nighttime, has anyone here had the chance to see the pretty lights on the falls? The reason they're there is actually not the reason that you probably think. It's not to make the falls look good, it's not so that you can see the falls. It's actually to distract people from the fact that we use 75% of the water at night to make power. So the entire purpose of the lights is to act basically as a decoy so nobody notices how little water is actually going off the falls. I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a project to do after this tour here. Go find a rock somewhere over by where the falls are, take a photo of it, come back tonight, take a photo of the same rock. You're going to notice that the water level in the rock is drastically lower than it was during the day. I'm going to hop further down this way. We're going to talk about...
So it's like turning on and off taps.
So everybody knows what a breaker switch is. Everyone has a breaker box in their house. This is basically our breaker switches. All the white cabinets, that's basically our breaker box. These are referred to as oil switches. They have 2 copper rods inside of them that when they connect, they send out the electricity down to the bus bars and then out to wherever we need to send it to. The only difference between these and a regular breaker switch is when a breaker switch flips, it kind of just flips off. There's maybe a loss of power. That's not that big of a deal. When these flip, however, they are prone to exploding. They are prone to shooting out a large fireball. So they are a lot more volatile than the breaker switch you're familiar with. That's why these doors are on a little bit of a different hinge than you're probably used to. They don't swing out like this, they swing out like this. And the reason for that is because if there were to be a fireball coming out of it and it swung out like this and not like this, that is the difference between your whole body getting singed or just your ankles, and maybe you just need to buy a new pair of socks. Not too big of a deal. They also had other safety features for it. Those brass railings that I pointed out over by where the materials are, you might notice the markings on the soapstone over here. They would have lined the entire soapstone for 2 reasons. 1, to keep the workers on that side, not on this side, because it's a lot safer over there. And 2, to stop these doors from swinging out a little bit too far. Speaking of the soapstone right here, why they use soapstone instead of just the concrete? Well, soapstone is fireproof and it's also non-electrically conductive. So say you're working on this and you were to get shocked, it wouldn't necessarily be a-okay, but it wouldn't be too bad. There was a worker that did in fact end up getting electrocuted while working here. Didn't realize it was live. He stuck his hand in there and he got shocked. Only reason he survived, standing on the soapstone right here. The last safety feature they had is these motors up top here. These motors detect the current that's going through the copper rods, and if it is different than anything it was set to, either because someone touched it or because it was overloaded in some way, it would detach those copper rods in 0.02 seconds, faster than anyone can blink, definitely faster than anyone can do it manually. So it's very important that they had those motors there. You'll notice that these oil switches did have a lot of safety features for them. That is because they were by far the most dangerous piece of equipment in the entire power station. There is one last little Easter egg that I like to point out to my tours here. And that is, inside here, on the brick, there's a little bit of pencil right there. and there's a name and a date. That is how they did inspections back then. So as they would come through and they would inspect the oil switches, they would come over, they'd write their name, they'd write the date. This one is from January 14th of 1951. So that's pretty early on. I know there's one further down that way that goes all the way back to 1907. And there's one that's my personal favorite one out of all of them. And it's actually Jim's father. He has his name and there's the date underneath. So we have a little bit of family ties throughout this power station. It's always fun to see those little Easter eggs throughout this building here. Now we're going to flip our attention to that big blue box right behind you there. And now this big blue box right here, this is referred to as a SCADA machine. Basically, the SCADA machine was the key to automation throughout the entire power station. Only problem with that is technology nowadays isn't necessarily the most reliable thing at all times. This was imported in the 80s, so you can imagine if nowadays it's not super always reliable, in the 80s it was probably even less reliable. Well, they were working here the one day and the floor started shaking a little bit. They were wondering if it was an earthquake or if there was something wrong. Well, it wasn't an earthquake and there was something wrong. Basically, this SCADA machine had one of these alternators here spinning at 400 rotations a minute, which is 1.5 times faster than it's supposed to be spinning because they're meant to spin at 250 rotations a minute. It actually came very, very close to going off like a grenade and shooting out shrapnel in every single direction. But luckily, they had one of the older workers on site who was able to go down underneath, shut it off the old-fashioned way, which is just a testament to how important it is to always have someone around who knows how to do things the old-fashioned way. I highly recommend that you come back here after the tour. I'm only showing you 3 photos, but there's plenty of photos here that are super well documented. It gives you the whole process from 1901 all the way up until about 2006. So that janitorial job that I was talking about over by the floor grills back that way, this is exactly what I meant by it. When I said you were cleaning all the big windows up top there, you would have been on one of the top windowsills over there, held by nothing more than just that little rope right there. Just shows how different workplace health and safety was back then. I was also told that when they cleaned the little ones up top there, they didn't even have a rope, they would just balance along the beam the whole way. So they'd clean a window, they'd bounce to the next one, clean that window, bounce to the next one, just keep going all the way down. Also, in terms of workplace health and safety, 1904, you can see there's a drastic difference between what we have now and what they had back then. Is anyone here familiar with the photo of the guy sitting at the top of the Empire State Building eating his sandwich? Basically our version of that photo right there. This man is sitting very nonchalantly on a wooden beam right above a 180-foot deep drop. So this is definitely not something I would have been doing. I'm not really great with heights, but I'm not too bad with heights either. Though I'd probably be standing somewhere all the way back there, maybe over where those guys are standing right there. Last photo I want to show you is just right down this way. This is what the power station used to look like, the generator floor here. You can see that brass railing that I was talking about right from the oil switches. You can see what the floor grills looked like before they got concreted over. You can also notice that the alternator casings are a little bit different. Those ones were painted black and they were made out of brass. These ones are painted blue, they're made out of cast iron. Now, why did they use brass instead of the cast iron off rip? Well, because in 1905, up until about 1922, they were going for the wow factor. They were trying to show everyone how luxurious it was. So they didn't want to really put an ugly cast iron casing on their alternators. And then they realized that brass does not hold up nearly as well as cast iron does, especially when something is generating that much heat. So they eventually swapped them out. You can notice that the further down they go there, they did start swapping over to the cast iron, and then they kind of retroactively changed these ones back this way.
Hello, hello. Hello, hello.
That's because they were realizing during the winter it was getting very, very cold in the power station. So they basically just put in large garage doors to stop any cold air from coming in. During the summer they could do the opposite. They could lift them up, get the hot air from the power station out, and try and get some cooler air in there. So earlier I said that there were no stairs, there were no elevators. Technically at last there are 3 elevators in the building, excluding the ones we added into the tunnel. There's one in the back, there's one in the front, there's one that would have sat in that shaft just right over there. Now the one at the back and the one at the front, they brought you down to the lower decks, but no one really ever liked using them. That's because I was told that the way you found out if they were broken was if someone went missing for a couple hours. So they tend to break down pretty often. A lot of people tend to go missing for a couple hours, so they just decided, let's not use them, we'll just use the ladders instead. Actually, Jim's dad did get caught in the elevators the one time it was broken, but to get back at him for playing a prank on him earlier, he just decided to leave him in there for a couple hours extra, and then eventually go get him a little bit later. No pranks were ever played on Jim from that point forward. Now this one right here, this is a very important elevator, and that is because it's the manager's elevator and the manager's elevator alone, and it would have sat in the shaft just right over there. Now if you're wondering what's up top there, there's a lot of cool stuff. There's the central control panel, the meeting rooms, the manager's office, and my personal favorite room in this entire building, manager's washroom. Now the reason I like the manager's washroom so much is because the whole washroom is made out of marble. Floors are marble, walls are marble, sinks marble, even the toilet's made out of marble. And everything's still there because it's incredibly difficult to get rid of a marble toilet. Now unfortunately I can't bring you up there due to safety concerns today, but if you come back in about a year or two, hopefully we'll have it a little bit upgraded. You'll be able to go up there and see everything for yourself, including that very important marble toilet. Now if you want to follow me this way, we're going to head into the forebed, give a little bit of information on that, and also answer any lingering questions anyone can have. Does anyone here know what the biggest enemy to running water would have been in Canada? Especially during the winter. Ice, yeah. If anything freezes over, you're not getting any power because there is no more running water. So they have a couple contingency plans for this. If you want to come further down this way and take a look out the window, you'll see the bridge that the traffic's driving on. Then you'll see there's a bridge right behind that, a little bit lower to the water. That is now a pedestrian bridge, but there used to be a train that would go back and forth on that all day with a rake attached to it. That rake would find any ice it could, break it up, push it down a sluiceway, push it down the river, make it someone else's problem, not ours. Fun fact, we also had a navy back then. It wasn't a very large navy.